It's just, to me, that's not the way that aquaponics got its start traditionally. And while it can be maybe more efficient, I think you lose the whole microbial symbiotic relationship that drives the quality of the products, in my opinion.
Agreed. And again, you're talking about nutrient dense food, if we can even use that terminology.
Exactly.
But bottom line is, if you take sap and tissue tests from products that are grown in your condition comparative to traditionally grown foods and fruits, you're going to see a huge difference, and you're going to taste a huge difference.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the plant sap. It's a kind of a new tool in our toolkit to analyze plants and what they're doing, what they're really taking up. So we're starting to do that here with our curriculum, is doing water samples and the plant sap analysis, sending them away, coming back and making an informed decision. And because we do know what we're doing with hydroponic nutrients, it's very simple for me to go get some boron or molybdenum or any of those other nutrient salts. And these are trace elements, so they're not going to impact the fish, but they're going to definitely make a difference in the plant production and photosynthesis and everything else that plants are doing. So I found as pure as I want to be, I do find that these systems do rely on some supplementation. And if you really know what you're doing with your plant sap analysis and your water analysis as well, have a good understanding of your fish diets and what you're doing for pH regulation as well, then you can get by with very minimal supplements. I think the UVI system that I ran supplemented about 15% of nutrients. So that's kind of the bar for a lot of people. If we can supplement 15% through pH regulation, a lot of people add chelated iron, for instance. And if you need a little bit of your trace elements, if you keep it under 15%, you're still a purist in a lot of people's opinion. But if you start adding 50% hydroponic nutrients to your water, you're more probably a hydroponic grower that's just using some fish water to top off your system. So there's a lot of classical definitions that are we're still debating on what is aquaponics.
And that will probably never end.
And we can look at soil application, right? Leighton, you and I are Ross growers, everybody that's recirculating aquaculture. So we're fish farmers. And there's many systems in place that do have that flow through, that 5% a day, that 10% a day. And why not put it on your soil crops, your orchard, your peach trees or whatever? But is that aquaponics? Usually aquaponics has a loop and a return of the water after the plants have used it. So direct application on your soil, I don't think it's necessary aquaponics. I've actually seen the word trans aquaponics trying to give definitions to all this and labels, and it's just as confusing as my kids' gender issues right now. There's a new name every week, it seems. I don't see that as aquaponics, but I do see it as feeding your soil aquaculture water, and that's your Bible to preach, Leighton. That's what you talk about since I've known you.
Well, and again, the reason I was basically aquaponics to you, so you didn't have to grow the fish, because I would capture the fish waste, mineralize it or remineralize it, but I didn't go all the way to the level you did. I grew out the biology so that I can then take the biology, mix it with compost and worm castings, and produce these what I want to call chocolate teas that are just amazing when they hit the soil.
And I haven't seen what's up in the industry lately, but I think it's a product that's going to take off when somebody really refines it. And there are storage conditions, and there's a lot of details. I've seen you work out for decades. How do you get that product to the customer? Can you do it through mail, or do you have to freeze it or ship it and these kind of things? Or do you drive 2,000 gallons, which weighs a lot? Transportation is difficult to get this out to your facility. So it does make sense for some large fish facilities to work on perfecting that remineralization process and using that land around their facility. And that's where I see a lot of aquaculture building soil. There's so much potential there.
Absolutely. And, the way I accomplished what I did was a couple of different ways. When I first went to Keith Wilda's farm down in Cape Cod, one of the things I identified was diatoms. And that was like, oh my God, you've got it. You've got what I need, because they're little oxygen pumps. So they prevent that DO from crashing based on the biological oxygen demand, or the BOD. as an acronym, and that was a huge step forward. And then a couple of years back, actually, probably 5 years ago, I met this guy that had a nano bubbler maker, which I don't know if you've heard about these, Charlie. It's pretty cool. There are some out there that are a little bit, what do you call it, aqua shysters? But the one that I settled on, the gentleman actually took a different step, a different approach. So what he did was he created cavitation within the device. And by cavitating the water, it's one of those forces, kind of like gravity. We think we know what it is, but we really don't quite understand what's happening on a microbial, or perhaps even further down the rabbit hole. You get into electrons, neutrons, protons, but something's happening there. And what happens is these nanobubbles are created. They're highly stable. As long as you're not agitating, they will remain in suspension until the BOD requires it, and then they implode so that they do not cause harm with the fish. Now, this was one of the things that I worked with Keith in trying to understand what is the maximum level of DO you can have in the water column and still support aquatic life. And it's about 15 parts per million. Maybe you have more information on that than I do. But
I think Nick Savidov, it's a factor of temperature and elevation and salinity as well. But I think Nick was maintained about 23 parts per million in a super oxygenated system. And that's about the cap.
Yep. And I believe what happens too is if you get too high, you'll actually burn the eyeballs of the fish due to oxidizing, which is, obviously very negative effect on the fish. But I was up to 30 parts per million and introduced it to microbes and had no problem whatsoever. So I actually started producing 4 gallons of the liquid and then putting in 1 gallon of this high dissolved oxygen liquid and put that into a 5-gallon bucket and was able to ship it cross country and have it shelf stable. So there are ways of doing it.
Sure.
Yeah. Keith in Fish Brew has actually gotten it to the point he's got stuff that's been sitting on the shelf, I believe, 3.5 years now, and still highly stable due to diatoms. Right. So again, the science is getting close to a point where we can produce, these incredible biological inoculants and have them shelf stable. But again, there's a couple different ways to look at this. Again, we're dealing with an inoculant, not remineralized liquids. See, the remineralized liquid is plant available. We're still requiring the microbes to do the mining of the materials and the protozoa to eat them and release them plant available. So I think you're a step or two ahead of even where we are at this point in time.
Yeah, I think you would tailor it for the application.
Again, always.